There's one other little quirk about Greenland, which is that they recently, 2021, they passed a law that said you can't mine an ore that is attached to uranium. A lot of these critical minerals are stuck to
Mm.
uranium. So one of the reasons why I think Trump wants to go in is to just change the law. But is there not another way to get that done?
Hello, and welcome to the Scientista podcast, where we bring you conversations with leaders, changemakers, and cultural figures, sharing how they're turning evidence and science into real-world impact. I'm behavioral scientist Dr. Shetta Chakraborty.
And I'm former Assistant Secretary of State, Monica Medina. And Shetta, this is so exciting. It's our first podcast of 2026, and it's going to be a great one. But how can you even be focused on this podcast? You're getting married in 3 days. How are you feeling?
You sound like my family members who are asking me the same thing, but ultimately, when we work in this space, you can never really turn it off. And as much as I want to be excited and optimistic about 2026, and I am for personal reasons, thank you, there is so much going on in the world that we can't ignore. We have to do our part. We have to have these conversations. We have to make sense of what's going on, and we have to share with our audiences. It's what I feel is our responsibility as those who are trying to really understand the future of energy security in this country.
And to see women leaders like this who stepped up and really did amazing work and who, I think have a lot of perspective on what's going on right now. And I I think there's no one I'd rather talk about Venezuelan dirty crude with than former Secretary of Energy Jennifer Granholm and her very close working colleague Karen Skelton, who was her counselor, which is kind of like saying her right hand gal in the Energy Department. And then Karen went on to work in the White House and help Secretary Granholm get all of the policy work done and all of the politics of energy. She helped work on that at the White House. So it's a really interesting um, pair of guests this week. And we don't often do two, but this one was just special.
It's a fascinating listen. I'm excited for our audience to tune in. And the reality is that we are dealing with this incredible takeover of Venezuela, this desire to take over Greenland. What does this mean for global geopolitics? What does this mean for climate change? We've seen the current administration withdraw from global cooperation on climate. And to make sense of all of this, we really dove in. We were super candid, and we really asked the tough questions to our guests this week.
Yeah, it's an interesting time to be thinking about both affordability and how do we make energy more affordable and what are we doing now that's taking us in the wrong direction on that, as well as is this helping us be more secure as a country? Is this keeping us safer, making our energy supplies more secure? So this is going to be a great conversation. I'm so excited about it. And these two ladies are so expert and so much fun. You'll see. Thank you both for making time today. And we always start out talking about where you've come from. We've explained that a little bit, but you've spent decades doing the work of trying to build a clean energy economy here in the US. The both of you, from your time in Michigan, Governor Granholm or Secretary Granholm, and Karen from your time in government as well, and then in the private sector. So talk about the kind of the complications of making this energy transition. And when you look at where we are right now, how has all that you've been through prepared you for this moment where we're kind of, stuck, shall we say, trying to get back on the right track when it comes to clean energy?
Please call me Jennifer, since it's all friends here, right? Um, so uh, honestly, who'd have thunk that we would be in a position where everything that was done over in the previous administration was strategically and systematically being undone. And so that is just shocking to me, how quickly and how with such force this has
Devastating,
happened.
truly.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, thank goodness we've got some pushback, at least, in the very near future, in the very recent past from the courts, but it's not enough. It's not enough. So, for me, the lesson of all of that is really we have been focusing, Karen and I work together now too. And I know we've been focusing on Where is it that we can get both the policy and the private sector moving to realize what we were trying to do in the Biden administration? And so focusing on the states, for example, that have clean energy policies to make up for the loss or the yanking of incentives from the current administration for clean energy, or focusing on countries that also have these policies, and for companies that may be in the disfavored category, they may be looking in these next couple of years to do a pivot, at least temporarily, so they can continue their momentum, but maybe in a different jurisdiction, or a different country. So working with the private sector and working with NGOs and working with state and local governments really has been, right now, I think, needs to be the focus of this incredible clean energy movement that we launched in the Biden administration.
Yeah, it's
Sure.
interesting, Karen. I didn't really do you justice because I forgot to explain that you were Secretary Granholm's right-hand gal, her entire time at the Department of Energy, except the times that you were working at the White House next to the president. And so,
But we were still working
but
Yeah,
you were
together.
but
still
we were
working
still
together.
working together.
Yes, and you're still working together. That's the best part. But I hear you on
Yeah.
the shock of today because some of the statistics that we're hearing, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez in a hearing just the other day said, kind of a litany of statistics that kind of took my breath away. 65,000 jobs lost, 53 billion in delayed private clean energy investments, more than 300 projects canceled. The list goes on of all the things that they have undone that were making our energy cleaner and less expensive and making us more secure because we didn't have to worry about getting it from somewhere else, right?
Yeah, and growing communities economically. Yeah, I mean, if you focus like the way I'm looking at this now is if I focused on all of these negative things every day, I would be in a fetal position, in my room. So I try to say, the lesson that I'm taking from this, in addition to what Jen said about, you know, the states or where the action is, there are countries that are really doing a lot. I try to talk to my environmental friends and say, don't let perfection get in the way of progress. There are things we can do and let's keep focused on them. If right now is our moment for nuclear, let's bring it on. If our focus right now can grow battery factories somewhere, let's do that. I think the way I look at the moment we're in is that we are in transition. Or transition is happening. And as Jennifer said, when she was secretary, you sometimes can't see the transition when you're in it. You just don't know exactly where you are, but we are in it. It may be slowed down, but it is still happening.
Yep.
And so let's get the progress that we can while we can.
Velocity slowed, trajectory continues.
You're echoing one of our previous guests and previous episodes. Jigger Shaw came on, and his sentiments sound very similar in that, the transition's underway, it's happening. Technology that will win out because it's the best out there. And he was very optimistic. And, I'm hearing echoes of that. And it's also, you've got to be, right? This is one of those times in human history that we're going to look back on and see what actually were the key components that resulted in that cleaner, more equitable, more just, more fair future. And so many communities were so excited about what happened during the Biden administration and what was finally going to be a future that was much more fair, something that we'd never experienced before in this country. From the outside, what you were doing, Jennifer, it seemed like, you were the one person calling all these shots and a lot of the credit went to you. But in reality, and this is what we like to think about and think through at Scientista, it takes a village, it takes a team, it takes a support, a sisterhood. And you had a great team. You had a lot of trust within your team. Tell us what that inner circle looked like and how you, as the then Secretary of Energy, relied on your advisors like Karen.
There's no question about it. I mean, I'm just one person, but we had I feel so lucky to have had the position that I had and the team that I had and the boss that I had and the resources that we had at the time we had. I mean, it was just amazing. And Karen was such an instrumental part of that, and other advisors too, but Karen was really center stage in terms of connectivity to communities. And when I asked Karen to join me, for example, we talked about the communities that had been left behind and how this clean energy transition that we knew that the Biden administration would enable would really help communities that had been unseen. And so, Karen can talk about this, but that she spent so much time in West Virginia, for example, not just, because we needed Joe Manchin, and this is true too, for the Inflation Reduction Act vote, but because West Virginia and the communities there really had been
God's
unseen
work,
and
I
they
tell you.
wanted to be. Yes, yeah, I mean, it really was, and that was true all over the country. And so the fact that Karen was both an intellectual boost to our executive team, but also boots on the ground, and that Karen also shared a dual hat and was in the White House working with John Podesta, who of course was President Biden's senior energy and climate advisor. I don't know what his hat was, but the fact that she was in both places enabled a continuity and a seamlessness that allowed for our mission to really be resonant both in the White House and on the ground.
Well, that is so generous of you, but let's also not forget that Karen likes bourbon, and West Virginia has a lot of them. You're in good
Say,
company.
I remember you telling lots of stories about how much fun you had visiting all the places all around the country. And I say that not only because you are a fun person and we've had a lot of fun together over the years, but also because it is about fun. Like, I know that it's hard work. Government is hard work, but it's about people and connecting to people. And if you love doing this work, that's, that's the fun of it. That's really the essence of good government is actually helping people, right?
Yeah, and getting out of Washington,
Which you
and
did a
really.
lot. Let me just
Yeah,
say.
I mean, I think that makes a huge difference when you're making policy and you're governing. I mean, I know, Jen, for you, you came alive outside of Washington in communities, whether it was, Native American, tribes, land, reservations, territory, or communities in everywhere in the country you went. You met real people, and you always insisted on hearing real stories. And I know, you did come alive when we would have people there that we had talked to. You know how it is to staff
Yeah, yeah.
when you talk to people before the principal comes in, because people tend to freeze up and you don't have a lot of time to spend, getting to really know people. But if I could introduce someone to you in a personal way, then you just took off and you understood, their lives in a way, how much they were paying on their utility bills, how much they were stretched in their family budgets, and what you could do about that became different after you met them.
Honestly, the notion of getting out across the country for every cabinet member, but being able to take those stories, meeting those people and put them in your backpack, as I would say, and carrying them back to Washington so that you can shape your regulatory and your policy regime around what you are hearing out there is just, it's irreplaceable, irreplaceable. Not to mention that, Karen can sing
Yeah.
Country Roads in Morgantown, West Virginia at the bar in the Hyatt like nobody
Oh, that's amazing.
with Joe Manchin at her
Don't
daughter's
get me
side.
started, Jen, about that night. Don't get me started. I think there's
If there
video
was ever an
somewhere.
opportunity to spill the secrets, please do. You're right here on the Scientista podcast.
Well, and it is interesting I think, to think about how you both weren't really actually hadn't spent a lot of your career in Washington. Most of it you'd spent in states and in other places. Obviously, Jennifer, you were a governor in Michigan and then you moved to California. Karen, you and I worked together in Washington a long time ago, but then you spent most of your career in California, again, working with state government. And I think, to go back to what you were talking about, Jennifer, there is a lot of activity now in states and talk about what you see out there that's really working well, where states are getting it right. Would love to know your thoughts on that. Who deserves a shout out?
Yeah. Well, here's what I mean. California deserves a shout out for intent. Execution is a whole nother thing, but there needs to be more, I think, an aggressive push from on high on, as Karen knows, I talk about this all the time, but the public utility commissions across the country are really
Yeah,
backwards in terms of
it's a
how
problem.
we need to compensate utilities for their operations. We shouldn't be just incentivizing utilities to build, build, build. We should be incentivizing them to help save money for customers. And if you do that, then you will see more renewable energy deployment, et cetera. So states, I mean, there are some states that, have really got a nice wraparound package. I think of like New Mexico, for example, where they've got loans for startups, they've got policy, they've got strategy, they've got a forward-leaning regulatory environment, but nobody has it exactly right in terms of the utility side. I would say that California, in trying to achieve both demand and supply side policy as a matchup, which is what we tried to do with the Biden administration for demand for electric vehicles, though, for putting $7,500 tax credit on the purchase of new electric vehicles, which of course was just taken away, but some states still have their incentives in place. That's important if we really want to see the electrification of the transportation ecosystem, but it's all a work in progress. I will say this, that despite all of the rollbacks of clean energy policy at the federal level, there's still an opportunity for example, as Karen said, nuclear, but also long duration energy storage. Those tax credits are still there, which is great. Manufacturing of clean technologies, that tax credit is still there. The ability to do carbon management, for example, CO2 management and control, that is still there. Hydroelectric power, dam power, those tax incentives are still there. There's stuff there that is really still very helpful, and I think we got to push on those in all of the states. So the states are eager to see it all happen. I think the data centers are a big component of that, and we can talk about that. But the bottom line is, I think there's a lot of action happening in the states despite what's happening in the federal side.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, that's encouraging. And we want to get into policy. We want to get into what's happening globally and politically. So before we do that, Karen, for you, this is a question that I need to throw out there from a personal level. I'm the only one in this episode that has not served in office in any sort of civil service capacity. And I really want to. And I know so many listening also want to give back to the country that they love, that they are a part of, whether we're talking about Americans tuning in or anyone, civil servants around the world. So talk to us a little bit about what you saw from the inside. So Jennifer was out. She was the one who was the spokesperson for all things energy. But what was happening behind the scenes that also really mattered, where scientists listening in could get excited about potentially also pursuing as part of their civil service futures?
Yeah. Well, I love this question. I have known Jennifer for 40 years, and I've seen her in a lot
Because
of
you met as
different
infants, right?
Exactly. We look
Exactly.
really good, don't
Thank
we,
you,
Karen?
Monica. Good. You're so always there for me.
Try.
But I didn't know what it was going to be like to really work with her as a secretary. You know how, sometimes you just, see surprises in people. That I will tell you that Jennifer Granholm was exactly the right person to be the cabinet secretary at the Department of Energy at this time. Because she had been a governor during a transition of an economy in a state, she understood what it was like to bring, as she said in another context, get the phoenix to rise. And that's what we did at the Department of Energy under her leadership. So I think, what you want is a leader like Jennifer who was able to mastermind an entire transition of that department. That's one of the largest
Agencies, yeah.
departments in the world, with an extraordinary budget, $200 billion more, navigate. So she was always level-headed. She's not a yeller. If you're a young person and you want to go into the federal government and your boss is a yeller, leave immediately. Jennifer
Good
good with
advice.
Yeah.
as she's respectful. She delegated to people, but she also held us accountable for performing. She's extremely competitive. So she wouldn't let anybody work harder than her. She's in that office every day at 7 a.m. She read her material. She came to meetings prepared, and that's what she expected of us. And she treated everyone with respect. And it was a complete joy. And at the end of the day, when you look back at how much we were able to accomplish under her leadership, it's a complete, life gift that we have been able to spend our time working on something that really mattered and that was successful.
I
That's
mean,
so nice,
Lovely.
Karen.
so
So
true though.
unnecessary.
And
So
let me
not.
just throw in as an aside, and you did it within the law. You didn't have to break all the china
Yeah, right.
to
We didn't
get
have to
it
bust the
done.
law. We didn't have to be taken to court every single day for a new
You
violation.
you let people
Amazing.
all
Yeah,
over the
no, it was
country have a chance to let their voices be heard, even if they didn't like the things that we were doing. The process was open, it was transparent, and you lived within the laws, and then you got them changed before you started changing them yourselves, right? I mean, it's a different day.
yeah,
Imagine
Imagine
that.
that.
amazing. One of the other things, though, I mean, you initially asked about young people and should they think about in terms. And this is a Scientista podcast. And so I want to put a plug in for those budding scientists out there who are interested in climate policy and climate technology and climate science for the national labs. We have 17 national labs. They are the nation's scientific enterprise. They take young people in all the time, and they are doing the work on the most groundbreaking technology to save our planet stuff.
Yes.
And so, despite renaming, for example, of the National Renewable Energy Lab, everybody is still working on these important technologies. And I really encourage young people to consider one of our national labs if
Fantastic.
they're in the sciences.
Well, thank you for that. We will definitely promote that. We couldn't agree with you more. Monica,
I
I know
know.
you want to get
I'm,
into
I'm
Venezuela.
from the State Department, so of course I'm looking at all of the things that are happening in the world today and going, "Oh my God, what are we doing?" I really literally wrote a LinkedIn post the other day. What are we doing? So let's get there. Venezuela, oil and gas.
Yeah.
You've spent your careers not only thinking about US energy policy, but how does it fit into the global energy scheme?
Yeah.
Talk about where we are now with Venezuela and what is the best case scenario given where the president has taken us with Venezuela? Is there one?
Okay, well, let me put on my optimistic hat for a moment and then my realistic hat. Optimistically, I totally get the notion of putting more oil on the market to lower prices for people. I mean, we tried to do that with the Strategic Petroleum Reserve under
Yeah,
Biden
you
when
did it. I
supply
mean,
was
and
really
it
crunched.
made a
It's a global
difference.
economy. And it did. It lowered prices. And of course, if you were able to unlock the largest oil reserves in the world, which is what is under the Venezuelan footprint, that would be amazing in terms of adding supply and lowering costs. Okay, that's my optimistic. I understand what is trying to be done. The challenge, of course, in Venezuela is that it's only producing right now 1 million barrels per day. That makes it sort of in the mid to low level of an OPEC supplier. I mean, they have a much greater potential than that. 10 years ago, they were producing 2.5 to 3 million barrels per day, but they've just got a huge reserve, right, of oil. The challenge is that none of the infrastructure has been invested in. And it would take between 50 and $100 billion to invest in the infrastructure such that you could reliably extract and process oil. And that is just no easy shakes when you have a government that is unstable, at putting it nicely. And this is why, Darren Wood, CEO of Exxon, said at the White House, we're not going to take on that risk. It's just such a huge risk. I mean, Chevron is there from a sort of a grandfathered
They
reason,
stuck it out, but
but
when everybody else
honestly,
left,
they stuck it out and everybody left, and they've got a residual reason why they've got a better deal than some others might. But the bottom line is these are businesses. It's a huge risk Not only that, but to release all of that other oil would bring prices down. And they don't make much more money, right? When the price goes down, they want the price to go up. Releasing additional supply may not be in their interest. So all of that is to say, I'm just not optimistic in that sense. Realistically speaking, I don't believe this is going to.
So interesting because
Hmm.
What do you think?
I don't think it's going to happen either. I think we're kind of in a mess now because we're there and it doesn't make economic sense. It's not easy to process and to clean up this oil that's pretty heavy crude.
It's
It
heavy
doesn't,
crude.
and on top of that, to get into the climate arguments, it's going down a road when everyone else is trying to turn the car around and,
Right.
and move on from these kinds of really heavy, dirty fossil fuels. And so,
Yeah.
Right.
honestly, if the president thinks that, he can get the oil companies to go in there and spend this money, they're just going to pass it on to the consumer. So again, it's just not that cheap. Maybe it may seem like it's a great idea, but it doesn't make economic sense, and it doesn't make, as you said, national security sense. There's so many other ways to get energy more easily, more effectively, more
Yeah.
inexpensively.
Right. And to your point about it being heavy crude, I mean, it is like tar sands oil, the type of oil that is most abundant. I mean, they have some light sweet crude, but the vast majority of the reserves are much heavier. And it takes a lot to refine that. So you'd have to invest in refineries. I mean, some refineries in the US could do it, but that's a whole it's a whole series of infrastructure plays that
Yeah.
that's very, very
And
expensive.
besides that, I would just add, it doesn't make any common sense. We don't need that oil because, as you say, Monica, we're turning around and we have in our own country enough oil. And even if we needed the oil and we wanted to reduce cost to consumers, it takes so long to do all of this that maybe 2030 it would drop the price of gas a cent or two. What
What
the
the hell?
hell?
What are we doing?
You know, I mean, it just makes no common sense. So you just gotta think that it's more amateur hour out of the White House or out of Trump.
Well, I've got to venture that this is just a real estate play like Greenland is, right? He's a real estate guy and he
True.
wants more property. He wants more land. He wants to leave saying that his manifest destiny has been achieved. And so allow me to then bring Greenland into the conversation. I know you all have thoughts on this. We're talking about a pristine mass of land that I had the immense privilege of visiting myself. And it was already additional airfields were being built at the time. And this was like 5 years ago at this point. So imagine how quickly all of this beautiful, untouched nature is going to be just turned into military bases and strategic plays and critical minerals mining. And it does have so much natural resources. So we can understand why there is a desire for some control of this region, but at the same time, it's still largely ice covered. It's still limited in terms of how much infrastructure can be built in a time frame that is going to really be helpful to the US or Russia or China or anywhere. So what do you think? What is going on here? Greenlanders don't want to sell. So
Yeah.
are we just going to take them over?
Well, I think that's an option, right? They're looking at acquisition, annexation. So not even withstanding the damage to NATO that everybody has been talking about. So, I get it. We are missing about 15 critical minerals that we just don't have in the United States. And we got to figure out how to get them because they're important for AI, they're important for chips, they're important, obviously, for clean energy, for batteries, et cetera. So, how do we go about? It's really the how that's the problem here. So, we know that Greenland has, for example, heavy rare earths. We need heavy rare earths. We need, dysprosium and we need yttrium and we need germanium, we need gallium, and they do all the processing of it. So why isn't the strategy to friendshore these particular materials that we know we need? So interestingly, I think this is a path that they could be taking. You know how he comes out and he says the big bluster,
Right.
we're going to annex or whatever. And then he's got something in his back pocket that he really is planning on doing. So I kind of think what happened this week was that they signed something called Pax Silica with Qatar. And Qatar will be this is with the United States. Qatar will be engaged in processing some rare earths and some critical minerals like gallium and germanium, which right now China has 100%
Processing.
footprint and they do 100% of the processing. Yep. And so it's a way to be able to use an ally to do some processing that we weren't, and to invest their funds into making that happen. So why not do that kind of thing on these critical minerals? Australia produces, cobalt. Australia has natural graphite. Why wouldn't we go there? Why wouldn't we partner with Canada on this? Because they have abundant critical minerals. Why don't we invest together in processing so that we're not shipping everything we extract to China for processing? So to me, that's the end game, is to friendshore or to identify friends that are processing that are not China, so that we become independent and we have access to these materials. And I'll say one other thing that they're doing, which actually I don't mind so much, which is more of a play where we take ownership of a partial ownership of a company that is doing this. So we're seeing this, for example, Lithium Americas, the Trump administration took
It's
an ownership
interesting.
position in
I mean, it's a whole different way
Mountain
of thinking
Pass.
about industrial policy.
Yeah. It's more aggressive than I would have ever thought Republicans would be doing. They would, state-owned enterprises, that's not their thing. But, it is a way of ensuring supply for national security reasons too.
This is why, feel so honored to be on a call with so many smart people who actually think about rational ways to answer questions like that. Because when I think about Greenland, I just think about Trump being, a complete thug and mobster, and doing something that is so anti-American to go after a NATO country. I mean, I can't even, what does that mean about the world order? He doesn't think about any of the stuff at the level that you guys just described. And of course, Jennifer, you know the name of every single critical mineral and element that we need for, chip development. But it's just insane to go after Greenland in the way that he
I
has
mean,
done it.
Greenland is reindeer.
Yeah, especially if it's in the name of national security. How does disintegrating NATO help national
Yeah.
security?
And this little country, I mean, they're, they were just minding their own business.
And minding their own
And getting
business.
there in a sustainable way.
Yeah, there's one other little quirk about Greenland, which is that they recently, in 2021, they passed a law that said you can't mine an ore that is attached to uranium.
Wow.
And a lot of these critical minerals are stuck to uranium. And so one of the reasons why I think Trump wants to go in is to just change the law. But is there not another way to get
And, I mean,
that done?
the risk to the people there when you unlock all that uranium is not
Yeah.
good
Yeah,
for
I mean,
people's
obvious
health.
right,
Let's just put
exactly.
it that way. Not insignificant.
Not
And it
insignificant.
was interesting. I
Yeah.
was going to say, Karen, Jigger talked about the potential for reusing batteries that we already have in cars. I know we can't replace every critical mineral that we need with what we already have, but we can be much more efficient. And he was talking about using them as backup power generators in places like California. There's all kinds of creative stuff we can do. And that's unlocking American ingenuity in a way that feels like a much smarter play.
Yeah. Redwood materials. I mean, there are tons of companies that are figuring out how to take apart, the old batteries and and refabricate in ways that can, as you say, Monica, I mean, we are the country of innovation and we could do this, but Trump is so narcissistic and so stuck on his might is right.
Agenda,
I guess, Stephen Miller now and me, now believe that that's our, national
I don't think it's who
anthem.
we are.
Circular economy, though.
Yeah.
I am all about
Circular
it.
economy.
Let's do the circular economy. Hey, well, yes, and while we're on there's sort of a perverse, unexpected consequence that's happening as a result of the removal of the incentives for batteries to be built in the United States, which is that the auto companies are now switching their vehicle battery operations. They're switching them to
I
utility
didn't know
scale
that. That's so
batteries.
interesting.
So yes, yes. So you're taking these battery investments that were made, and they see the need for utility scale or long duration energy storage, and they're converting their lithium batteries to utility scale. So that's an
Well,
interesting
you're on the
unintended
positive
consequence.
side. I was going to cite the negative, which the New York Times was all over today about the $25 billion in losses that these car companies, your former constituents in
I know.
Detroit, had to take because the current
Yeah.
administration just put that whole program in reverse, took it away as it was just getting off the ground. Meanwhile, other countries, China, are just zooming past us on the electric car market. We're going to be
China's only so
loving it.
happy. Yeah, China is so happy. We have
We've served it up
here
to them on a silver platter.
Yeah.
100%, 100%. And we're just watching it whiz by. I mean, China, BYD now the largest EV seller in the world. I mean, we've just lost the ability to even to do this in the US. If they really wanted all of the above,
It
this
would.
would be a component of that.
Yeah.
It's such a
Anyway, well,
lie,
we'll go back on something positive. Shut is going to get us
So,
there. I know it.
well, I was going to ask how raging mad she is about Michigan, but let's actually come back to the US and let's talk about how Democrats do need to do a better job at selling clean energy to the public. We have midterms coming up. How are you thinking about this challenge now? You're someone who's really, Jennifer, to you, you're someone who's run some very tough races. And as far as I know, you've never lost an election. So, from that vantage point, what advice would you give Democrats about how to talk about energy in a way that really connects with voters and
Yeah.
in a positive way, right? That's critical. We shouldn't be focusing on what's making us raging
And what
mad,
can we
or should
learn
we?
from what
What
didn't work
works?
the last time?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, unfortunately, it is true that climate is not high on people's lists, right, of things that they're most concerned about. But affordability, you betcha they are. And we win that argument. I mean, the lie out there is so evident when you think about your electricity bill. Part of your electricity bill is fuel. If your fuel is free, guess what? Your electricity bill can come down. So it's so much common sense. The more clean you have, the cheaper it will all be. And now we've got to, as I say, we have to change the model a bit to incentivize the lowering of costs rather than the increase. But this old model, we must have natural gas peaker plants for the times when things are crunched on the grid. No, what you can do, I mean, yes, those natural gas peaker plants, maybe they'll be in use, but if you're smart, you will use the extra capacity on
Wheel
the
it
grid, which
around, right?
exists 99.9% of the time. Yes, and move work to where it's not at capacity. If you're an AI data center, and everybody's using the grid and it's, the middle of the summer and the air conditioners are on. And so you're at capacity. So maybe the utility company insists that the data centers don't go to uploading cat videos during peak hours. Maybe they shift that to some other part of the country
Don't
that
go
is
that far,
less.
Jennifer.
I know you love your
Don't
cat
touch my
videos.
cat video.
Or
We
cat
can't
ladies for
ostracize the cat
sure.
people.
Cat videos too, but the bottom line is you managing the grid and using those data centers as a grid asset and using grid enhancing technologies, which I know it's blah, but if you could put twice the power on an existing line by just using a different type of material, wow, why wouldn't we do that instead of paying the cost of building new poles and wires? Why don't we use the data centers themselves as a grid asset, as a virtual power plant? I'm sure Jigger must have talked
He
about
did. You
VPPs,
channeled
as
him.
we
He
call
did.
them.
You
Yep.
turned us on to
Yes.
them. Anyway.
So anyway, bottom line is I think we can sell this by just talking about cheap. Cheap energy is clean energy. It's renewable energy. It is the cheapest part. And people will say, well, it's intermittent. Well, hello. Isn't that great? We've got new technology called batteries to
Right.
make renewable energies like baseload power. So anyway.
I mean, affordability is clearly the word of the day now. But how do we tell that story that makes it real to people.
What she said. I mean, 100%. It's just about that. We have to talk to people where they are. Of course, we have to use every, possible
I was gonna
medium that
say,
we
is it
can.
social media? How do
Social
we get
media.
it literally, how do we get it to them? On their phones?
Yeah, I mean, we get it to them in all the ways we know how to get it to now, but very local and very, targeted to household level, community level, and using influencers and people that people relate to, telling this real stories about how real people who they know have had the costs go down and
How
their
do you think
energy be
we
cheaper.
turn Landman into a,
Yeah, I mean,
right? Like,
Exactly. We need to get
I
we
know.
can just take out that one episode where he talks about wind turbines. So crazy. So crazy. But
Is so evil, right? Like, he is exactly what's wrong or he is exactly what's right. It's like a Rorschach test for America right now. I love that show
I
too.
confess that I
I
love that
love that
show,
show.
and
I
I
love that show. In fact, last night we got in a fight in our house because neither one of us has the Paramount
Oh,
app, so we couldn't watch it.
it's gonna
So
cost
that's
you more
tonight's
now for sure.
goal.
You're
well,
so honest, you're not borrowing from a friend. That's actually very commendable.
yes.
Okay, ladies, this has been so much fun. We have learned so much. We've come to the end, which is disappointing, but I hope we can bring you back as all of these topics we've talked about continue to unfold. We'd love to get your insight and expertise, down the line. So please keep doing the work you're doing. I doubt we're in any risk of that not happening, but please do come back and join us on this podcast. But one last question before we let you go. So, this is the curveball we like to ask our guests. All of the work that you're doing, science, policy, leadership, there's uncertainty. We know experiments fail. We know policies don't land. We know plans change. So, can you both share with us a moment in your career where something didn't go as planned? And how'd you work that out? How did you figure out what to do next?
So many things to choose from. I don't know. I mean, I used to work for Al Gore, as Monica knows. Her husband was my boss, and I thought he was going to win the presidency, and he didn't. And that was very disappointing. And at that point in my career, I had a couple choices. I could, continue to work on the kind of environmental issues that he was so passionate about, or I could move in a different direction. And I just found another leader to and another way to serve those interests and values. And I was really glad I did. It wasn't quite at the caliber of Al Gore, but it was important work, and I just kept going.
Yeah,
Kind of
you
like
picked
what
up
I'm
and
doing
moved
now.
all the way across the country with your young family and kinda started over where you came from, but you hadn't been there in a while, and you really rebuilt your whole
Yeah.
career, supported Democratic and Republican governors in California, and, really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Monica.
I would say, because this is top of mind, I think it was a shock to us that an administration could come behind and undo things that we thought we had made lock solid. For example, all of the grants and loans that the Department of Energy committed to, or money out the door even, have been clawed back. And I would go into a new administration saying, assume the worst. Assume that in 4 years, there will be an administration that pulls all of this back. How do you make it lock solid for the courts to make it super clear this is not acceptable, that you can't abrogate signed contracts with money in the bank? We would never have supposed that this administration would be violating principles of contract in such a blatant way. But I think we would have gone faster, obviously, if we had been able to convince Joe Manchin earlier to be able to pass the Inflation Reduction Act so that we could get all these grants out the door. But nonetheless, even the ones that were out the door, I mean, I just got word this week that all of the grants that were sent to Puerto Rico for rooftop solar have been pulled back. And it was all pulled back. We worked so hard on this, and I was just shocked because the money was out the door. So this is the lesson going forward, is that whoever's in the new administration, assume the worst of your successor and then button it down so hard that not any court would dare undo it.
Well, thank you for sharing your insights truly and for being our first podcast guest for 2026. This is the perfect
Yay!
timing for us. Absolutely. Yes. And you really are helping us make sense of some of the madness that's going on in the U.S. around energy policy and national security.
Thanks so much for listening to the Scientista podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, help others to discover it. Share it, like us, and tell your friends all about us. We really appreciate all your support.
And you can always find us at scientista.world for more stories, updates, and ways to get involved.